What's up, guys? This is Brent with 247parts.com, the best place online to buy your John Deere parts. Now, whenever we're talking about removing our grease fittings and reinstalling with new ones, this may be something that you have never thought of because you've never had any problems with your grease fittings before. But if you do run into that grease fitting that does start to give you problems, what you will see is whenever you put on your hose onto your grease fitting and you go to pump grease in it, the grease may just come out the sides. And so this is a telltale sign that we need to replace that fitting. But if you have not gotten real familiar with your machine, whether it be your tractor, lawnmower, whatever that is that has these fittings, and you haven't looked really close at your fittings, you may not know that there are two different kinds. So whenever we are looking at grease fittings, what we can have is, for one, we can have one that looks like this. It's going to have threads on the bottom, and then it's going to have a hex head on top. So this is going to be a screw-in type grease fitting. Now, this is what you would assume all grease fittings are. You would assume that we just have to screw it out and screw them back in whenever we are going to replace it. But what you need to keep in mind is there are also drive-in type fittings that are going to look like this. Now, the big main identifier of a drive-in fitting is that it is going to have a round edge right below your actual grease nipple here. So you can see that rounded edge, whereas on a screw-in type, it is going to have that hex head end. So we need to make sure that whenever we are looking into this and we are going into the process of needing to change these grease fittings, that we know exactly which type we have. Now, what you could do is you could get in touch with the manufacturer of your piece of equipment, go ahead and get that part number. This is going to be a good idea as well, just to make sure that you're getting that right fitting. But if we are changing out one of those screw type fittings, this is going to be very, very easy. We're just going to have to go ahead and find that ratchet and socket or that wrench that's going to fit on that fitting. And then it's just as simple as making sure screwing it out. But before we do this, we want to make sure and get the surface around it clean when we screw that out so we don't get any of that debris down in the hole. Then we just simply have to back that out with whichever tool that we're using. Make sure to swap that out for the new fitting, or check and make sure that we don't have just a plug in the existing fitting, and then we can simply just go back in, screw that in, and then we're good to go. Now, it's a little bit more challenging of a task and requires a few more tools whenever we're talking about changing out a drive-in fitting. So the way that I found works the best and is the easiest, it's going to be the one that if you don't want to go out and buy some sort of special tools, a lot of times you'll have the things right there at home or in your shop to do this. So what I do to remove these drive-in fittings is, for one, I take a pair of vice grips like these here, and I'm going to grip that on the top of the grease fitting, getting it nice and tight, and then starting to rotate these vice grips, just getting that good and loosened up, because you got to think once that has been driven in there, it's going to make it tight. It's going to be in there solid. So we want to get that broken loose first with a set of vice grips. Now, the next thing to remember is that you are replacing this grease fitting. So if you damage it a little bit, that's okay, but we just want to make sure and not break it off at the end, because then we have a whole heap of problems. So the next step that I do is I go ahead and I take a claw-headed hammer like this, and I fit that around the neck of the grease zerk, and I usually take a second hammer and go ahead and tap that onto that grease fitting. And then what we want to do is just make sure that we have that on a surface that we've got some leverage, and then we just start to pull back on that, just raising that up ever so slightly. Sometimes we have to go and tap on the hammer like this. That seems to work good, just to get some force to pop that fitting up and out of its place. Now, once we get that fitting up and out, the next step, of course, is to go in with our new one. So what I like to do is, you want to, whichever size grease fitting you may have, and there are going to be different sizes, I'll show that a little bit more here in a minute, but whatever size of grease fitting you have, you want to find a socket or something like a socket to go on the end of that grease fitting, just like that, where it's catching that outer edge. And then we're actually going to use this to drive that down into wherever we're putting that grease fitting. So right here, I went ahead and sat the grease fitting down in the hole there, took the socket, set it on top, and then I grabbed my hammer here and just lightly tapped that to get it started. And then you can start to go just a little bit harder on tapping that in. We don't want to go crazy because we don't want to damage that grease zerk, but we'll go ahead and drive that in until it's flush. Now, sometimes this can be a frustrating process. Sometimes this takes a little bit of time. The hammer, sometimes it's hard to get that fitting down into the claw where it needs to be. So just slow, steady, that's going to be the way to do it. Like I said, we want to make sure and not break off the ends of these grease fittings so we don't have more problems. Now, what you're going to run into whenever you are looking for your grease fittings, you're going to have many different kinds. Like I showed here, we are going to have 45-degree fittings. So right there, that's going to be a screw type, but that is on a 45-degree angle. We're also going to have 65-degree fittings. These are all going to be screw-in type fittings. We're also going to have 90 fittings like this, and then you may also have some extended fittings that have some extra piping that comes off before it gets to the threads. So there are all different kinds. So whenever you are looking into doing this, you definitely want to either look up the parts yourself or get in touch with your manufacturer, find the right grease zerk, or take the grease zerk off first and then take it to the parts store that you're going to get your new ones to make sure that you get the right ones. Now, one other big thing while you're going to do this is you need to make sure that you understand that there are going to be different types of threads. Most of the time, all of your ends are going to be universal because grease guns are made to fit one size here at the top. But what gets tricky is we need to make sure that the threads are the same. Now, this one is obvious. You can tell that this one is a lot smaller than this one here, but sometimes they're very, very close. So we need to make sure that we are getting that right fitting before we go on. But other than that, guys, pretty simple process, just a few simple tools that you need to do this job. So make sure that you are taking care of those grease zerks to make sure that your equipment is getting the life and longevity that you would expect from it. So guys, I hope this video helped you out. I hope you liked this video. If you did, we just ask you to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, guys, if you're needing any John Deere parts at all, including these grease zerks, make sure to go check us out at 247parts.com. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Hey guys, make sure to go buy your parts right here and subscribe right here.